Hi guys, and welcome to another video of mine. Today I'm talking about an RC trailer which I'm going to be towing. It's from TRC. It's a little camping trailer, and it's going to be more for scale looks. It's going to be for photography. It's going to be just for these little stories with the actual trucks themselves. If we go ahead and open this box up, which I've actually done before, let's just see what's incorporated in here. So this, as you can see first, is the canopy for the trailer. Of course, these were the instruction manual. And the instruction manual is, honestly, I think you're going to need a magnifying glass to read this thing. If you just have a look at this. I mean, yeah, it's not going to be easy to see all the screws, etc. that's required. At least there's a legend here that shows you what are the actual screws. As we mentioned, that's the canopy itself. Looks like a nicely sewn item. I'll probably end up spraying it a bit just to weather the look of it, just make it look a bit used. This is the actual main body, made from hard plastic. Inside of this we have bits for the roof, nicely molded. The screws are going to be quite small on this thing, I can tell already. There's the hinging mechanism. Okay, let's see. The main chassis, as it were, and yeah, this is more of the mechanism itself for where the storage bins, etc. are, I expect. We'll have to see. I bought the version that actually has the wheels as well, so nicely detailed cast steel wheel bits. The main chassis components here. So these are all cast items, I can tell. Chassis to axle mounts. The actual axles themselves, as you can see. Okay. Tires, nicely detailed. Doesn't really need to have performance attached to it, obviously. It's just more to make sure it looks scale, and they're an acceptable design. We'll get to them anyway, and we'll see them in more detail once I open the packaging up later. Yep. And finally, the main frame for the chassis. Looks quite nicely put together here. All right, so let's start on this build, and as and when I encounter difficulties, or as and when I actually make progress on it, we'll narrate them and add video to this. All right, we'll check back in a few seconds or minutes. So a couple of things to take note of. Firstly, I'm very, very happy because when I was looking at the various screws that are included in this kit, they are Allen screw heads. Thank goodness there's not some horrible Phillips head screw type of system. Allen screws, which is a great thing for me. The second thing is the plastic itself is beautifully molded, very smooth. I'm just going to do a light sanding of these parts, paint them with primer, and then I'll get the actual coat of color on this. Yet to decide what coat of color I will use on the trailer, but I'm suspecting it's going to be a gray color of some sort, a bit neutral, and it will be a slightly weathered looking trailer. So let's get to that, and then once I've done it, I will take some video and you guys can see what's happened. So the plastic parts of this specific kit will be coated firstly with fine surface primer by Tamiya. Now there are a couple of other brands. I found that the Tamiya primer is the best. Primer is actually used to spray a first layer over and above the plastic. It does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it allows the paint to grab onto the plastic better. And the second thing, which especially when you're painting body shells, etc., to get that perfect smooth coat where the plastic may be a bit rough, for example, this surface primer, when wet sanded with some very fine grit sandpaper, such as let's say maybe 1000 grit sandpaper, which is a rating for sandpaper roughness, will make that base coat layer very, very smooth, so that by the time you're spraying the final coat of paint, it is very smooth. So this is good stuff. Always prime your plastics before you put the actual coat of paint on. Now, with the parts primed, at the moment you can't really tell, but it's white primer that I've used specifically in this case. It's a bit on my fingers, etc. But the white primer creates a very powdery sort of feel that, as I've mentioned earlier, allows the paint to connect more easily with the actual shell. What I'm going to do now, so I've sprayed inside and out. What I'm going to do now with this specific shell is along edges, such as these edges all around here, I will be spraying some black. And the reason I'll spray the black is because after that I will then spray the final coat, but I will leave some of this a bit uncovered, and that will create the illusion of shadow. It creates depth, and it, to me, creates just a bit more interest when it comes to actually looking at a specific plastic body part, rather than just leaving the shadows to be real shadows themselves, because that for some reason just doesn't add as much depth to any paint job as far as my eyes can tell. So we'll get to that next, and then I will return again. So now you can see I've used some canned spray, matte black. In this case, it's not a Tamiya, it's another company called Mr. Hobby. Now, my personal preference is Tamiya, but unfortunately the store ran out at the time, so I've only got this, which is still a good spray. Can be typically bought from all the scale model shops, such as Military Modeling, etc. I'm not using a spray gun yet. I've yet to decide whether I will use a spray gun for this specific job, because again, it depends on how detailed I want to get it. But let's see. You can see that I've sprayed areas where I foresee there's going to be some shadowing. Now, there's a lot of overspray here. Don't worry, it's not going to look like this in the end. But this is basically what I'm doing, creating shadow. Across the edges where there's a double line, I've just thrown some spray on. Likewise here, where you can see that there is going to be these grid lines here, again sprayed along the edges as well. Next step after this is done is the actual coat of paint in the color that I want. We'll get back to you again as soon as I've done that, and you can see how it's starting to look. So as you can see now, we've done the basic color. We've also got some of the dark grayish black shading around the edges, etc., that comes from the black undercoat. So with this, I've also then gone and subsequently sprayed a semi-gloss clear coat, because this is a very matte paint job, given it's Tamiya Military Modeling colored paints. So I guess I stand corrected. I've just looked through some of these screws, and unfortunately, due to the size of them, a number of them have to be Phillips head screws. Again, not a big deal, but they do irritate me. This does remind me a lot when I look at a package like this. It certainly reminds me of when I was building the Range Rover body shells, although the Range Rover body shells from JS Scale had much smaller screws, so this is not that bad at all. But it is what it is. I'm almost thinking, in fact, that it's the same company that makes this set of hardware that actually makes the hardware for the JS Scale Range Rover, because you can see a lot of these hinges are very, very similar, if not identical. Anyway, So let's get to it, get a Phillips head screwdriver as well as the Allen screwdrivers that I've got, and we'll get back to you. So we've got pretty far in terms of the chassis. It was a pretty quick build. No major points of concern in terms of fixing this thing up. Maybe the only thing you'd take note of is putting the washers and the bolts into this portion here were a bit tricky. You really need to use a set of tweezers to get them in there, otherwise your fingers will just be struggling. Other than that, it was a pretty straightforward screw together. Whether or not you end up using liquid thread lock, etc., it really is up to you. The only other thing to take note of is there is no suspension. If you end up trail driving very quickly with this, it will be bouncing everywhere. It would just look very unrealistic. All said and done, its purpose is much more as a very slow scale trail driving accessory and for the photographs. And that's pretty much where we're at right now. I'll get back to doing the upper level of the trailer, which is the plastic components. We'll put them together, we'll spray paint a bit more because there are a few more items that need coloring on them. And then from there, let's just get this whole thing together and see what it looks like. Okay, so we've now installed the main body of the trailer onto the chassis. It was done via 4 Allen screws and 4 bolts. The actual shell itself, as you can see, is already painted now, more or less. We've got all the shading, etc. The overall frame of the camper that will be used to actually mount the tent and open the tent up has also been mounted here. This is made out of metal. It is also pre-painted and it comes in 4 pieces, and these pieces are then just bolted on neatly onto the lid. There are also the legs that are bolted on separately with adjustable extensions depending on how high or low the trailer is versus the tires and the ground. We've used Tamiya paints. We've also used Tamiya clear for the lights. I've not actually gone so far as to paint the inside underneath where the interior of this trailer will be. I've also not wired up the lights in this case. I think the wiring of the lights is something which, from my perspective, is unnecessary, given that this will not be driven that much or trailed that much behind one of the trucks. The likely scenario is this is more for photographs and just the odd very slow video. Again, the slow video simply because there is no suspension on this trailer, and as a result of that it will just be bouncing around everywhere and it just wouldn't look that good. It's much better for photograph purposes, I think. That's where we're at right now. We'll touch base again in a couple of minutes. I'm going to start putting the rest of this trailer together. It's been almost half a day's worth of work, a bit more than I'd anticipated, and no doubt I'll spend a bit more time detailing it with painting after I've assembled it fully. So we'll be back in a second. Now, one thing to take note of is these little 1.5mm screws that you can see here. They're used on a lot of hard body shells to basically mount the hinges. One thing that you want to be doing for sure is with these holes, get yourself one of these little drill bits with a little hand drill, sort of like a screwdriver as it were. These can again come from places like Tamiya, etc. Purely for model making, but when these holes get jammed and if these little screws get stripped at the head, you're stuffed. So one of the things you really want to always be doing is opening up these holes with a little drill bit. After you've opened them up, keep on tapping the screws in and out until they're loose enough, because by the time you've got a hinge on there and if the holes are slightly off, it will be a tight fit. So just make sure you always tap these and you always use one of these little drill bits beforehand. Otherwise you're going to have a real heck of a time trying to get these little screws in and they may not come out. Just a little tip there. So here we've got the body or the main trailer attached to the chassis together with a tent inside. There were a couple of difficulties. This screw is a bit on the short side down here. It's not something which I'm entirely happy with, but it'll still function. So that's one of the things. Now, the other thing is in relation to all these screws here that mount the internal part of this body to the external, the alignment was not great. You can sort of see here, and as a result of that, I had to get a drill and just drill straight through so that I would get a screw through with the bolt. Not perfect, but it holds together. So we're going to continue with the final touches to this thing, set it up and make sure it's operational. After this, we'll put the wheels on. So these wheels and tires look quite nice mounted up and were not that hard to put together. I'm a bit surprised given the design, because if you look at it, you've got the inner ring, the inner plate, the outer plate, and you've actually got this, which is the section here that goes inside where the hex mounts in. To get all of these put together with a screw through was not something that I thought was going to be particularly easy, but it worked out quite easily. So here we have it, more or less completed. A fun build, not what I'm usually interested in building, given that it's an accessory more than a truck itself, but I did want to get one of these for photography purposes so that I could actually create some diorama scenes. So overall, a nice accessory. You'll see that I haven't put everything together yet. I just thought I'd mock it up and do a finalized video for you all to see roughly what it looks like when completed. We had a couple of run-ins. One of the key ones was really in relation to the wheels. I've taken off the hub here so that you can see that looking inside of this wheel, there is a very low tolerance level between the bolt in there and the outside circumference of the wheel. It meant that I really needed a socket that was either made of paper or essentially I just needed a very, very thin socket. Unfortunately, I went through all my tools. I couldn't find anything that would fit well. So I ended up having to machine one of my spare socket heads. As you can see, there was a lot of machining required, but that finally allowed me to get full clearance into the wheel itself to finally bolt these wheels and tires on. Now, the other thing to take note of is that this trailer unfortunately had a tent that was using straps here that are supposed to connect down to a mounting point below here, and a strap here that connects to the mounting point somewhere around here, as well as these to the rear bumper. But unfortunately, it just appeared that these straps were a little too short, and as a result of that, I was unable to stretch this canopy directly all the way through to over in front of the trailer base. Not a big deal, because ultimately I was still able to at least just get an approximation of a tent, but a bit disappointing nonetheless. It'll be okay for photography purposes, but I really would have liked it if these had all been longer. As you can see, the rear of the tent is opening and closing with Velcro, as is the front. The tow hook was supplied with the actual trailer, and this connects up quite nicely to most bumpers. I had to do a bit of machining of the metal tow hook. I had to drill out the hole to a 2mm to allow the bolt to go through for my bumper. Overall, quite happy with this. It's definitely a nice addition to my collection, and it will serve a lot of purpose when it comes to me taking some photos for my Instagram account. So I'm quite happy with it from that perspective. Could have been better in terms of the build. Again, there was some minor issues with regards to fitting, with regards to screws, etc., not working perfectly. I look forward to actually building my first Team Raffee Discovery body shell. I've got a D90 and actually a D110, and I hope to see the fit on those body shells is at the very least as good, but hopefully better than it was on this trailer. Well, that's it for now. I do hope you enjoyed watching this short video on this trailer, and I look forward to bringing you guys more videos in the near future. Take care and stay healthy.